Welcome back to the Broadman Word, and uh, had to take a second there as I am trying out a new camera, and so just I'm not the most tech person in the world, so try to figure out what all has to go with that. But we are continuing on with the idea from last time about Israel going into Goshen and the importance and the blessing that is. So let's see how that comes together and what that looks like. So, chapter 47 of Genesis, we are going to be in verses 1 through 12. So, Genesis 47, 1 through 12. So, Joseph went in and told Pharaoh, "My father and my brothers, with their flocks and herds and all that they possess, have come from the land of Canaan. They are now in the land of Goshen." And from among his brothers, he took 5 men and presented them to Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to his brothers, "What is your occupation?" And they said to Pharaoh, "Your servants are shepherds, as our fathers were." They said to Pharaoh, "We have come to sojourn in the land, for there is no pasture for your servants' flocks, for the famine is severe in the land of Canaan. And now please let your servants dwell in the land of Goshen." Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is before you. Settle your father and your brothers in the best of the land. Let them settle in the land of Goshen, and if you know any able men among them, put them in charge of my livestock." So Joseph had this idea, which was, I'm sure, completely evidence backed up. But this idea was that Pharaoh and thus Egypt were going to be have a lot of questions concerning the fact that the family, a lot of them were shepherds, because again, that class or that occupation, were not seen as very a very high class in the land of Egypt. So because of that, uh, Joseph wasn't sure how Pharaoh was going to respond, even though he has been obviously a very important part of the country of Egypt up to this point. So he goes in, and five of Joseph's 11 brothers, five of them go with him. We don't know which ones they are, but he takes five of them. Most likely, probably a mix, but a little bit probably more the older ones, just because again, a lot of cultures would put a lot of influence on the older sons or daughters or the older children in general. So he takes them to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh has this just wonderful response. And not only is he saying that, "Look, I understand exactly what you have all been through," the fact that not only is your family been suffering, but your occupation has suffered because you cannot get uh, the 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 produce for your livestock in Canaan. So I will provide you with Goshen. But it's interesting how he describes it though as well. So if you look at verse 6, halfway through, he says, "Sell your father and your brothers in the best of the land." So that land there, I think, is not talking about Goshen. I think it's talking about Egypt as a whole. And then he follows that up with, "Let them settle in the land of Goshen." So I don't think it's like he splits Goshen in half and gives them the better part of Goshen. I think he's saying, "Look, I'm going to give you the best part of the land in Egypt as a whole, and that is Goshen." But then he follows that up even more with, "Look, if they are really as good as you uh, claim for them to be, Joseph, then put them in charge of my livestock and for other livestock of Egyptians that live in this country." And what a response that must have been for Joseph to hear that and to go, "I was not expecting that." In a way, Pharaoh basically is breaking down that past just kind of overlooking shepherds. And I think it's because of the 7 years of famine. He understands the devastation that famine causes, but he also understands the hardships that it puts in different occupations, including shepherds. And so the fact that he is able to provide anything is, I would say, in a sense, kind of softening his heart, which is really, really interesting to see. But again, I have to go back to the character of Joseph. If the character of Joseph was not there, I don't think Pharaoh would have changed his mind about these outsiders that come into Egypt if they weren't connected with the character and the person, the characteristics and the person of Joseph. I think that's really, really important to see. So they get this permission to go into Goshen, and so they obviously take that. They obviously take that blessing for sure. And let's see that verse 7. Then Joseph brought in Jacob his father and stood him before Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Jacob, "How many are the days of the years of your life?" So before we get to the answer of that, this is actually a very, very important moment because, in a way, Pharaoh is seen, yes, he is seen as, the title of Pharaoh is seen as a god in Egypt, but the title of Pharaoh is also seen as a father figure for many of the Egyptians. And so for Pharaoh to have a conversation with Joseph's father is a very big moment. It is this recognition of one fatherly figure to another. Obviously, we don't believe that Pharaoh is God, right? But the interesting connection is the fatherly figures. One, Joseph's actual father, biological father, Jacob. But then you have Pharaoh, who has been like a father to Joseph for the 7 years of abundance, and then for however many years we are at here in the time of famine. And he gives him the opportunity not just to run the country, but to really just put forward his wisdom and his knowledge and his gifts that obviously the Lord gave to Joseph. But Pharaoh is giving him the opportunity to show those off. And I think that is what a great fatherly example. So, but he asked this question, how old Jacob is. So, verse 9. And Jacob said to Pharaoh, "The days of the years of my sojourning are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my forefathers in the days of their sojourning." So, the response is interesting. So obviously, we find out here that Jacob is 130 years old, which obviously is very, very old, very old indeed. But it's interesting to see he how he describes life. He calls it and he mentions it to be a sojourn. In verse 9 there, he sojourns 130 years. And then later on, in the days of their sojourning. So he calls life a sojourn, which is not just a walk, but it is, as the name kind of gives it away, a journey, but a journey with a purpose in mind. Now, it's interesting to see how he describes his journey versus the journeys of his father Isaac and his grandfather Abraham. He describes his journey as few and evil have been the days of the years of my life. It's interesting. So for one, it could the one reason why he could be saying few, it could be that because he is not as old as Isaac was when he passed, or as old as Abraham was when he passed. But the evil part is interesting there. you could be thinking of the time where he had to run away from his brother Esau, or the time where he um, was tricked by his father in law Laban. You could also think about the time where he had to wrestle with God, and God, I think, touched his hip and broke it, or sprained, or something like that. Um, and I believe that was at Bethel. And then but then the biggest one, of course, is here within this context. Not only do you have him losing his belated wife, Rachel, but then you have him losing his son Joseph for a time, but he thought forever. And then you have one of the brothers, one of the oldest brothers, being kept in captivity in Egypt for a time, and then you have the prospect of losing the youngest son, but the last connection to his belated wife. And so I think all of those things together are the description of few and evil have been the days of the years of my life. Now, some will say that the few is to describe the evil. So he's had few evil years of his life. But even if that's so, why bring that up? My guess, and because of how he goes on to say it, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my forefathers and the days of their sojourning. I think he is focusing on the trials and hardships that he has gone through. Now, why tell this? Why tell this to Pharaoh? Why open your heart and explain this to Pharaoh? I think it is to show the wisdom, and but also the character of Jacob. I think it is to show that Jacob, who was so focused on mischievery, being mischievous, right? He was so focused on being trickery and mischievous and crafty when he was younger, and really just so much about himself. And now he is changed to the point where he is everything was about his family. Now, obviously, he had some favoritism issues, right? But that part of him has changed. Now, he does realize that there is still more work to be done with his sons, and there will be a time of prayer and blessing over them. We'll get to that later. But I think it is just this opportunity where he is in front of Pharaoh, and he gets to just, in a sense, kind of tell him his testimony. And I think that's really, really interesting to see. Verse 10, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from the presence of Pharaoh. Then Joseph settled his father and his brothers and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, and the best of the land of Ramses, as Pharaoh had commanded. And Joseph provided his father, his brothers, and all his father's household with food, according to the number of their dependents. So, again, we see the repetition of the fact that they are going to be and living in the best of the land. And again, I think that is the land of Egypt. Now, he does say in the land of Ramses. It is possible, I'm not going to say, it's hard to tell what Pharaoh this is, but with a mention of Ramses, it is possible. It is possible that this Pharaoh is either Ramses or related to Ramses, whichever Pharaoh that would be. That's more just it's more just historical background than anything else. But they are given the best of the land. And not only are they given the best of the land, but they are also provided with food by Joseph. Uh, but there is still the problem of the famine going on. So we will see how Joseph responds to said famine next week. We will see how he responds to the rest. I should clarify the rest of the famine to come. So we will see that next week as we get closer to finishing the life of Joseph and walking through that. And for this one, last thing here, for this passage here is really the concept of God providing um, his his followers with exactly what they need. Maybe not in the way that they were expecting or the time that they were expecting, but he comes through and supplies every single need that they need. And so that is really, really important to see from uh, Genesis 47, 1 through 12. So I will see you all next week as we see how the rest of the famine comes together and how Joseph, with the help of the wisdom of the Lord, helps guide those in Egypt and abroad through the rest of the famine. Thanks.